Polish is considered as one of the most difficult languages to learn. Is that true? Hi, my name is Monika and in this channel I'm teaching Polish. And in this video I will try to answer the question if Polish is really so difficult to learn. But before I answer the question and tell you why Polish might be difficult, it's good to understand that the way how we perceive a language as difficult or easy to learn, in most cases depends on us, on our experience, what we know already, our motivation, approach, etc. But now let's have a look at the Polish language. Let's see what might be considered as difficult for an English speaker. One of the things that might be difficult when learning Polish is the word inflection. Word inflections is all about the word forms you might see, depending on the case, tense, number, person, gender, etc. For example, we have a sentence: Mój kot jest czarny. My cat is black. Mój kot jest czarny. A very basic sentence. But then if you want to change the words into plural, it will be Moje koty są czarne. Moje koty są czarne. So we can see that there are some changes in the words. Mój became moje, kot became koty, jest became są, czarny became czarne. So in order to make plural, there are a lot of changes when it comes to the ending, but also sometimes inside the word. To some extent, this also happens in English, so it's not a surprise. We have cat and then cats, is, and there is are. So word inflection is nothing new in many languages, but it all depends to what extent. But sometimes it might be difficult to relate to. For example, in English, my is my all the time, no matter if it's singular or plural, but in Polish it changes. So it's important to simply change the mindset and accept the fact that more words change their form depending on different grammatical categories. Some people say that thanks to all of the word inflection, the language has more dimensions because then you manipulate the words slightly and it changes the meaning. And when we talk about the word inflection, what is included in that are the cases. In Polish, we have 7 grammatical cases. Cases, in short, these are different word forms of the nouns, pronouns, adjectives, numerals. In English, for example, we don't talk that much about cases, but there are different forms of words which we can relate to. For example, in English we have she, her, he, him, boy, boys. So these are different forms of a word and express something different. And now let's see all the 7 cases at a glance in Polish. The first case would be the nominative case, as in the example to jest kot. To jest kot. So kot is a word in the nominative case. And this is the basic form of the word. This is what you will look for in the dictionary. This is usually the subject of the sentence. Another case is the genitive case, like in the example jedzenie kota, jedzenie kota. So kota is, for example, expressing the possessiveness. Whose food is that? Cat's food. Jedzenie kota. So thanks to that, we know whose food is it. Another case is the dative case. For example, daj to kotu. Daj to kotu. Give it to the cat. Thanks to the dative case, we know who is, for example, the recipient in the sentence. Another case is the accusative case. Like in the sentence, mam kota. Mam kota. So So the cat is in a different form. It's in the accusative case. And one of the functions of this case is showing what is the direct object of the sentence. So it's not the subject, but the object in the sentence. So I have a cat. I would be the subject, but the cat is the object. Thanks to that, we know the relationship between the elements in the sentence. Another case is the instrumental case, like in the example, z kotem, z kotem, z kotem, with the cat. Instrumental case is used, for example, with some prepositions, like with z. Another case is the locative case, like o kocie, about the cat, like a story about a cat, o kocie. Again, this o preposition requires the locative case. And then the vocative case, kocie, dear cat, when we are calling the cat to come. Kocie, chodź tutaj. Dear cat, come here. So this is, at a glance, all the 7 cases that exist in the Polish language. And the key here is to remember what is the function of each case, what does it mean, and then what kind of endings the words have when we use the case. But this is a story for another time in order to explain in detail when to use the cases and how to inflect the words. Let's move on. Another thing that might be difficult to learn are the genders. So what kind of gender a word has, like feminine, masculine, neuter. Genders do exist in other languages, like in German you can see the genders, der, die, das, or in Spanish we have genders, in Swedish we have genders, but in Polish they work slightly differently. But what is interesting in Polish, the genders are not only visible in the nouns, but also in the pronouns, adjectives, verbs, and the way how genders are classified is different in singular and in plural. But let's see some examples. Let's see a sentence where we have the masculine singular. On był zmęczony. On był zmęczony. So on is he. Obviously this is masculine. But also we can see that the verb był is in masculine. This is the masculine form for this verb. And also the adjective zmęczony. Zmęczony has the ending, which is a characteristic for the masculine. And then if we compare the feminine, then this sentence would be then ona była zmęczona. Ona była zmęczona. She was tired. So on became ona, był became była, zmęczony became zmęczona. So here the characteristic for the feminine is the a ending. An example in the neuter gender would be ono było zmęczone. Ono było zmęczone. So here we can see different endings because of the neuter gender. And there are different rules that define what gender is a word. And it is for people and for objects as well. So an object can be feminine, the other object can be neuter, another object can be masculine. And depending on the ending of the word, you can easily guess the gender. And if you are interested in detail how to define the genders, you can check one of my previous videos on the topic. And then moving to plural, we can see that also we have masculine plural, but then this is defined differently. This only includes people. So if we refer to people but not objects, then we can use this plural. Oni byli zmęczeni. They were tired. Oni byli zmęczeni. And then we have non-masculine plural, which includes a feminine and neuter and masculine objects. One były zmęczone. One były zmęczone. Then another example of the word inflection is the verb conjugation. What kind of forms a verb can have. We already saw some examples, how był, była, było looked like. Let's see another example in the present tense. Ja mam, ty masz, on ma, my mamy, wy macie, oni mają. So this is an example how to conjugate the verb to have in Polish. We can see that there are different endings for each person. Also, what might be challenging when learning Polish is getting the understanding of the formal you form. So in English, it's quite easy. We always say you to one person, like to a friend, hey, you, but also to friends, you. We can use a you in a formal situation, informal situation, but in Polish, that's not the case. We need to remember that you, when saying informally to one person and to many people, is different, but we need to really be aware that in formal situations, when, for example, talking to sales assistant or somewhere to a teacher, we will use the formal form. So let's now see the formal you forms in Polish. The formal forms are in red: pan, pani, panowie, panie, państwo. They have a different meaning. So pan will be used when we address a man, like a sir. Pan jest, and this is an example of a verb we can connect with. You are, sir. And just to let you know, this jest is in the third person singular. So it is like you is. You is. Pan jest. You won't say pan jesteś. You will say pan jest. Or when we address a woman, then we will say pani. You are, ma'am. We will say pani jest. Panowie are gentlemen, men that we are addressing. Panowie są. You are gentlemen. Panie są. You are ladies. So panie is when addressing women. And państwo, państwo są. You are ladies and gentlemen. Or one lady and one gentleman. Państwo is used when we address a mixed group. So it contains at least one man and one woman. So these are different forms that you will use when addressing a person formally. Another thing that might be challenging in Polish are the verb aspects that might not exist in other languages. And here is just an example. I won't go so much into detail, but just to give you an understanding what's that. So verbs, not all, but many verbs, are divided into two aspects. There is the imperfective aspect, like robić, robię, I'm doing something regularly. Or robiłam, I did something regularly. So we focus on the action, on the process. It's not finished. This is when you use this form. But when we focus on the completion, something is done or will be done, then we use the perfective aspect. And the example here is zrobić, zrobić. And when we inflect that, it will be zrobię, I will do something, or I will have done that. Or zrobiłam, I did it, I have done that. So we can see one letter difference. Robić, zrobić, it changes the aspect of the verb. But this is more for advanced learners. So one time, maybe I will explain more. Another thing that might be challenging when learning Polish are the sound alternations. Here are some examples. Ja mogę, ty możesz. So we can see that the g is in the first person singular form and ż is visible in the second person singular. Mogę, możesz. This is an alternation. Something changed to something else. Or other example, stół na stole. A table on the table. So in the inflected form, it changes. U became o, w became l. Pies, psy. Another example. Pies, a dog, psy, dogs. And in here, what happened? The combination ie disappeared. Another thing that might be challenging when learning Polish are numerals, so numbers, in what kind of form you might see them. So one thing is learning the numbers, but then you will see something that might surprise you. Let's take the number 2. Number 2 can look differently depending on the case, but also depending on the gender, or if it's collective, or if it's informal. Understanding all the forms of the numerals is something more advanced. So if you are a beginner, don't worry so much because it might be too overwhelming. For a beginner, it's enough to remember dwa at this stage. And of course, there are some things related to the pronunciation and spelling when learning Polish that might be challenging. Especially when we talk about sounds and letters that do not exist in your language. Like these letters, on, l, u. So the first 2 sounds are nasal, on, l. The third one, u, is maybe simple to pronounce, but the way of writing is confusing. On, l, u. Or some consonants, and as in Polish, there are a lot of consonants. So again, it might be overwhelming when seeing all those letters, all those consonants in one Polish word. And especially these ones will be challenging, like sh, sh, ż, j, ch, ć, z, d, dzi, ni, r, w, h, ż. They might be challenging because how we pronounce, but also challenging how we write them. And then also the concept of voiced and voiceless consonants. In Polish, certain consonants are voiced and they change to voiceless depending where they are located. For example, chleb, because b is at the end of the word, we say p. Or ławka, v is voiced, but because it's next to k, it became voiceless, ławka. And the other thing that might be challenging when learning Polish is the vocabulary. As in Polish, there might be words that are not very similar to words in your language. For example, szczęście. Szczęście. This word, one thing, is difficult to pronounce, but it doesn't look close to happiness or luck at all. Or książka, książka, or przepraszam. But I wouldn't want to scare you off that Polish is so difficult and is impossible to learn. It is possible. Luckily, there are many things in the Polish language that might be easy to learn. So let's go through them as well. So when looking at the letters in the Polish alphabet now, you can recognize a lot of them that are also in English. Of course, you can still see some letters with those piggy tails, those lines above, or dots, but still it looks kind of familiar. Also, what makes it easy to learn is that though the pronunciation might be considered as difficult, still there are clear and stable pronunciation rules. So in most cases, each Polish letter represents the same sound. Like in the examples, okno, o, k, n, o. These are the sounds and we put them together in the word okno. Or like in the word hotel, h is pronounced in this case. Of course, there are some rules that sometimes 2 letters next to each other create a separate sound, but these rules are very clear and stable. What also makes it easier to learn Polish is the word stress. almost always the second to last syllable is stressed. So you don't have to worry where to put the stress. Is it the first syllable, the last syllable? For example, in English, the word stress can be in different places of the word. But in Polish, it's almost always the second to last. Like alphabet, alphabet. So we have 3 syllables in this case, alphabet. And we count from the end, which is the second. So fa is the second syllable from the end. But in English, it would be the first, alphabet, alphabet. And in Polish, alphabet. Or the next one, komputer, komputer. So pu is where we put the stress. Komputer, 3 syllables. We put the stress on the second from the end syllable. Or hotel, hotel. Not like in English, hotel, hotel on the last, but on the second from the end. So I assume that this is really making life easier when learning Polish. And also it's good to remember about one thing that makes learning Polish not that difficult. It's the fact that we have one common standard language in Poland. So when you learn one version of the language, you can communicate everywhere. And the spoken language does not differ so much from the standard version, how you write, for example. There are sometimes languages like the Finnish language, where the spoken language is totally different than the written language. And another thing that might make it easy to learn Polish is the fact that there are no articles. So you don't have to worry about and the to put in front of the noun. You just put the noun. So książka, it's a book or the book. Jabłko, it's an apple, the apple. Another thing to remember about Polish is that there are only a few tenses. So it's not like in English, there are loads of tenses, present perfect continuous, etc., etc. In Polish, we say we have 3 tenses, and 2 of them are divided into 2 subcategories. So like 5 in total versions of the verb. So as an example of the robić, to do verb, we will have in the present tense robię, in the past tense robiłam or zrobiłam, in the future tense będę robić or zrobię. So not that many forms when it comes to the tenses. Another thing that might make it easy to learn Polish is that the word order is quite flexible, but not random, which makes it not so strict to follow all the rules that, like in German, the verb always has to be on the second position of the sentence. Something like that does not exist in Polish. However, there are preferred ways of saying something more natural, or when we want to emphasize, then we move around the word. So if you want to say Marek loves Ania, then in a neutral way it would be Marek kocha Anię. But if you say Marek Anię kocha, that's also grammatically correct, but maybe you emphasize something different. Anię kocha Marek, Marek kocha Marek Anię. Kocha Anię Marek. And I previously mentioned that in the Polish language there might be a lot of unknown vocabulary or not so easy to guess, but luckily there is a lot of international words that make it easy to learn a lot of vocabulary. You can guess easily what is komputer, hotel, telephone, banan, right? So this would be the overview of the Polish language, showing what kind of aspects can be challenging and what can be not so challenging when learning Polish. And as mentioned at the beginning, the difficulty you have when learning a language mainly depends on you, on your motivation, on your approach, on your previous experiences, on your learning techniques. Learning Polish is a great adventure you can experience. And even if it might be sometimes challenging or complex, you can think that this is a really good exercise for your memory, for your brain. So I would recommend having a positive approach when learning the language and looking at the whole learning process as an interesting adventure where you will boost your curiosity, activate your brain, and discover new things in the world, new cultures, and simply enjoy the moment and have fun.